All right. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bill Eller at the Conservation Commission. I think everybody can hear me just fine, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to my presentation here. As Shauna just said, what every CD staff person should know is our objective today. And I just want to let you know that the answer to that question is coming from my perspective as the VSP coordinator. And that may not be what you want answered today. So I would urge you, if you have questions about VSP, to type those in the questions box or to have them in the back of your mind ready to ask them as we get done with my presentation. I might address some of those questions during the presentation, but there should be pauses that we can use to answer some questions as we go through. Because again, this is my idea of what I think you all should know, given that you are CD employees and you work very closely with the counties that are implementing VSP at the county level. But that may not answer your question. So I just wanted to throw that out there for folks before we get started. But we're going to talk a bit about how and why VSP was created, what's its relation to the Growth Management Act, the GMA, the county requirements under VSP, the reporting requirements. We're going to talk about the current VSP budget and some current issues and events and activities, and then resources available for folks. All right, so why was the VSP or Voluntary Stewardship Program created? Under the Growth Management Act, all counties must adopt a critical area ordinance to protect critical areas, the 5 critical areas there on your screen. Now, I know probably most of you are aware of all that, but there's a reason, there's a method to my madness here of going back into this much background, and we'll get there in just a moment. But so VSP is all concerned about protecting those 5 critical areas. Okay, so when you couple that under the GMA with the Shoreline Management Act and its exemption for ongoing and existing agriculture, you had a situation where several counties were exempting agriculture from their critical area ordinance or CAO. So counties were starting to do that through the Growth Management Act process. But the trend in the courts was that whenever cases came up, the trend was that ag wasn't ruled exempt under CAO requirements. So that made everybody nervous. That made the ag community nervous about regulation impacting ag. It made environmental community concerned about agriculture and its impact to those critical areas. And then it made the counties nervous about costs of litigation, since this question seemed to be unresolved. And none of those concerns are exclusive to any one of those groups, but in general, that's where we were back then. So in the early 2000s, there was a number of different efforts to kind of address this issue. One was through a Citizens Initiative 933. Another one that became much more definitive because it actually went to the state Supreme Court was that Swinomish versus Skagit County case, which said that ag was not going to be exempt from the GMA requirements and that counties must regulate ag in their CAO. So right after that decision, folks were really concerned about the outcome of that decision, which led to the Ruckelshaus Center getting involved through the legislature and trying to come up with some alternative path to GMA regulation for ag. And that led to an agreement, a negotiated agreement, which became the VSP legislation. So that's a really important point and really important notion to understand that VSP is a negotiated, is a compromise piece of legislation. And what that means or should mean to you is that it probably doesn't have everything you would want in it because it has to satisfy many different players, many different stakeholders. So it probably doesn't do all the things you want it to do in the way that you would like it to do. And that's really important to have that in the back of your mind as we go through the rest of VSP, not only the planning portion, but also the implementation phase. Another really important concept for folks who like to get down in the weeds is that last bullet, which is that counties are not obligated to implement VSP until funding is provided. So although the VSP was created July 22, 2011, and codified in the GMA statute, it wasn't funded until the 2015-2016 timeframe, which is kind of the current era of VSP when we started planning and implementation. That third bullet there, VSP is an alternative to GMA regulation for counties to meet their Growth Management Act requirement to protect critical areas and also maintain agricultural viability in their county. So that July 22nd, 2011 date became very important, is very important, because it's the baseline date for protection, and protection is defined in the statute as prevent the degradation of critical areas. And that means that the condition of critical areas, their functions and values, must be protected as of that date. Another really important concept that folks either don't learn about when they first learn about VSP or kind of forget over time, and especially state agencies have a difficult time with this concept, but the program is really locally controlled by each county. The commission's involvement really is an oversight agency, administrative agency for VSP. But really, the counties generate all of the planning, all of the initiative, the implementation of VSP over time. And that is a really important concept to understand as well, because it creates lots of tension in the system when you start talking about how the county interacts with the state agencies who have regulatory oversight over many different aspects related to critical areas and the protection of critical areas. But you're trying to work that through the voluntary incentive-based process that we have here at VSP. So creates lots of tension there, and it's an important concept to understand as you move forward. One of the other important concepts is that second bullet there, that even though the counties are responsible for planning and implementation of VSP, the counties may and typically do delegate that those efforts to another entity to implement locally, and that is described as the technical service provider in the VSP statute, and that usually ends up being a local conservation district, and that's where you all kind of come in to this effort, because conservation districts are experts at voluntary incentive-based programs to get conservation on the ground with private landowners, and that is really the sweet spot where VSP operates in conjunction with those critical areas and the protection of ag viability, or the maintenance of ag viability. Another important concept, although it's maybe not so important now that we've kind of worked through all those issues, is that concept of that VSP is focused on agricultural activities, wherever those occur, wherever they intersect with critical areas, and not just with ag land designations. So it's a broader definition under VSP of ag activities that fall under the purview of VSP than maybe perhaps you might be thinking about, especially if you're a county planning staffer, I would say. How do landowners participate in VSP? Primarily through individual stewardship plans, ISPs. They engage with the counties through the ISP process, and there's a range of what ISPs mean to each county. Each county is free to kind of establish the definition of ISP in their own county VSP work plan. And that could be something as simple as a survey, and it could also, the other end of that range would be a full NRCS farm plan. So counties run the gamut of ISPs, depending on how they've addressed that in their VSP work plan. And really, landowners exemplify that the voluntary aspect of VSP, because they are free to engage, and they're free to come into the program, they're free to leave the program at any time. The county work group that we're going to talk about here in a little bit is the entity that must work with those landowners in order to meet the needs, the goals and benchmarks that they've set for themselves, the county work group in the county's VSP work plan. All right. There's two entities that assist the commission in the administration of VSP, the Technical Panel and the Statewide Advisory Committee. The Technical Panel is made up of representatives from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Department of Ecology, the Department of Ag, and the Commission. And the Technical Panel reviews the work plans when they were created about 3 years ago, and they determine if they really will protect critical areas while maintaining the viability of agriculture in the county. They also review and evaluate every 5 years the county work group's 5-year reports. We'll talk more about that in a bit. The Statewide Advisory Committee is kind of it is really the entity that the commission uses to advise it on all things related to VSP. And it's made up of 2 persons from county government, 2 persons from ag organizations, and we have 2 spots for environmental organizations, but we've always had difficulty filling those spots, and they're currently vacant right now. We've also invited tribal representatives, but have not yet, in the 5 years of the program going live, had a tribal representative, although we keep seeking that out. There are a whole bunch of purposes in VSP set out by the legislature. I'm not going to focus on too many of them. You can see them on the slide there. But the commission and the counties are all charged with trying to achieve all of these different purposes. So at least for the commission side of things, we always have these purposes in the back of our minds whenever we're doing anything related to VSP. Counties were given 2 options. You can either opt into VSP or you can continue under your own GMA regulatory scheme, and they had 6 months to make that decision. And the effect of that was 27 counties opted in, and you can see the 27 counties on the map there on your screen. Most of the counties on the west side that didn't opt in to VSP had either something very close to VSP that they were already doing under their GMA scheme, or had some other path, or going to keep the traditional path of GMA. So they had a variety of reasons why they didn't jump into VSP. So counties have a whole bunch of responsibilities under VSP. You can see a list of them generally on the screen there for you. Once they opted in to VSP, they have to determine which watersheds are going to participate in VSP. Some counties applied VSP to the entire county, to all watersheds in the county. Some just chose 1 or 2 watersheds in the county. So one really important thing for you, especially moving forward with the 5-year reports and reporting process in the future, is knowing is your county, all the watersheds in your county in VSP, or just some of them? And the ways you can find that out is you can read the county work plan, it will tell you, or you can read the opt-in ordinance. And the commission has both of those on the commission's VSP webpage. Probably the easier way is the opt-in ordinance, but if you're going to be doing VSP implementation on behalf of your county, you're going to have to read that county work plan anyway. So either way, you're going to get the information, but those are the 2 sources of that information, so you know for sure what watersheds in your county are in VSP. The chief responsibility of the county in VSP is to create a watershed work group, which in turn creates the VSP work plan, which covers the entire county, maybe just some of the watersheds in the county, like I was just talking about. But it covers the county as it has opted into, chosen to opt into VSP. And then the watershed work group is kind of the overall strategic level guide for VSP in the county. Now, some counties chose to kind of keep all of this in-house and use county staff to run work groups. Others hired consultants, and then still others have hired conservation districts to do that work. Which does your county use? If you're at all involved in VSP through a conservation district, you probably already know the answer to that question. But the majority of counties use a district to implement a VSP, and they have a subcontract with each district to do that work. All right, I'm going to pause there before we jump into talking about the County Watershed Work Group and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, I do see one in the questions box so far. Does the county have to amend their resource ordinance to include VSP if they opted in?
The simple answer to that question is no, but there is kind of a very, very complicated question depending on your circumstance. And I would urge the person who has that question to contact me after, because we're kind of getting into the weeds of VSP for that particular question. And I would like to know more about that situation before we talk about those weeds, I guess.
Okay. Another question that just came in: if the county has opted out, is there any opportunity to opt in now?
Oh yeah, so that's a good question. So there was a window, and I talked about it in my presentation already, a 6-month window, I believe, back in 2012, when VSP passed for counties to opt in. And they had to do it at that time, or else they could not join. So only 28 opted in, 1 dropped out subsequent to that, so we have 27 in. So there is no way for a county that wants in now, that didn't choose to get in before, to get in now. There's been a few different legislative efforts to open VSP back up to the 12 counties that are not in VSP, but they have not been successful at the legislature yet. But I know counties are interested in VSP moving forward. So it wouldn't surprise me if that legislation was brought back up in the next session. And if you want more details on all of that, I can put you in touch with Ron Schultz, the policy person at the commission and legislative person, and he would have more details about all of that.
So that's the only questions I see that have come in so far, Bill.
Sounds good. I will keep going. Keep thinking about those questions here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the County Watershed Work Group. And this is a really important entity at that local level, because they're responsible, like I said earlier, for creating the VSP work plan and also for implementing the work plan. The initial funding for counties went out in 2015, 2016, which is when the counties also accepted that funding. So essentially, they had 3 years to create the plan, and then every 5 years from there, they have to do what we call a review and evaluation report, a 5-year report of the work plan, and continue implementation unless they fail out. And we'll talk about that too. But that's VSP at this point in a nutshell. Is every 5 years there's a reporting requirement. There's also a 2-year reporting requirement. We'll talk about that too. The main difference being that 2-year reporting requirement can't trigger a fail out. So in my mind, the 5-year reporting requirement is much more important. So we tend to focus more on that one. But, all right, so counties are supposed to, when they receive those funds in 2015, 2016, create the work group. It's supposed to have a broad representation of key stakeholders for VSP. Typically you get a lot of farm commodity representation on those groups from the ag side, which is great. We also get some environmental representation, which is also good. You want to get a whole bunch of folks on there if you can. And sometimes it can be helpful to have state and federal agency representatives on there as well. but that's the County Watershed Work Group. They craft that plan, and they're responsible for implementation. So all 27 counties have plans that have been approved by the technical panel. So we're all in the implementation phase, and the work group needs to meet on a regular basis to make sure that they are meeting those goals and benchmarks that are set out in the plan, and also to adaptively manage the plan if need be. So it's unlike virtually any other planning that you might have been involved with in the past, because VSP goes beyond the creation of the plan. The plan doesn't just sit on the shelf. It is adaptively managed as you move forward. So someone's got to do that, and that responsibility falls on the county work group. Now, the technical service provider, if that's the district, can certainly help and assist the county work group with that process, but that's one of those things that the county work group needs to do. So yeah, so kind of graphically, you can see how VSP implementation works. The county work group is definitely the most important part of that. That's the soil, right? If you don't properly care for that soil down there, your tree is not going to grow. Now, the different branches of VSP implementation are typically done by the technical service provider, which is typically the district, and that involves a whole bunch of stuff that some of it I've already talked about. But doing outreach to landowners, collecting data, assisting the work group, those are all things that typically the technical service provider does, but you've got to have that county work group involved in all of those things. They need to direct that technical service provider based off what their county work plan says to get all of those things done that are related to VSP implementation. Okay, so let's talk briefly about the work plan. So the work plan, again, is supposed to protect critical areas while maintaining agricultural viability. They all were approved by the technical panel, and there's that periodic evaluation, the monitoring and adaptive management, which again is kind of new for most folks, is a really important element of each work plan. The work plan, if you had to summarize a whole bunch of stuff into one slide, the elements would be the last 4 bullets there on your screen: identify critical areas, ag activities, ag viability, figure out how you're going to do outreach and assistance to landowners. What are your goals and benchmarks for protecting those critical areas while maintaining agricultural viability? And then how does the monitoring to ensure that you're meeting those goals and benchmarks, how is that going to be done? And what might trigger your adaptive management actions? All of those things are elements of the work plan. So as we already said, the counties had about 3 years to complete those plans, and they all have completed them. And what you end up with in the county work plans is a whole bunch of different things addressed. I'm not going to focus too much on those. I put these actual elements of the work plan in my presentation to remind folks that the statute requires a whole bunch of different things to be addressed. And you can see them on the screen. I didn't want to take them out because all of your work plans for each county are going to address each one of these elements right out of the statute. And one of the most important there is E, which is the benchmarks related to the critical area function and values. This is not for folks who might have jumped into VSP in the middle of the 5-year reporting process. The Commission is not setting these goals and benchmarks that need to be reported on or monitored for or adaptively managed. It was your county work group as required in the VSP statute doing that. On your screen there also is really important. Establish the monitoring for those 3 elements. So again, each element of the work plan is pretty complicated. So you end up with all kinds of different goals. You have programmatic goals, measuring progress on implementation of the plan. You have natural resource goals, right? Protecting critical areas. You have economic resource goals about the viability of ag. and the work group is responsible for ensuring all of those goals are being met. And I'm not going to focus too much on the work plan approval process because, as we've said before, all of the plans have been approved through a process that they went through for the first 3 years of the life of VSP. So you can see on your screen, and thanks Brian Cochran for putting this visual together, where we are, everything I've just described to you so far. We're just completing the first 5-year reporting process cycle right now, and basically what happens is you kind of go right back through all of this process again with another 5-year report coming due in 2025 and 2026. I'm going to pause there and see if we have any questions before I jump into the relationship between VSP and GMA, which is another aspect that's really, really important to understand.
Thanks, Bill. I do see one more question in the box. Would be good to know more from counties who are managing VSP with consultants. Has this been successful, and how widespread is this method of management?
Yeah, that's a good question. So how widespread? I would say at the beginning of VSP, it was the majority of counties were going that route. But now I can say there might be, I don't know, between 3 and 5 counties that still have a consultant involved. Most counties now use a conservation district in that role. But how successful that would be, I would say probably would be good to talk to the county work group folks and the county planning staff to get their direct answers. You can give us a call at the commission and we can kind of give you our own opinion about how well that's going implementation wise, but we don't get to see the full picture. We're not as close maybe as we'd like to be to every single one of those 27 local county work groups to know all the intricate details of what's going on with that group. We do know some because we do get out every now and again to those work groups in a variety of ways. So I would say give me a call and we can talk some more about that, in particular if you have questions about certain counties. All right.
And then, yep, just a request to see that process flow slide one more time.
Process flow slide. Oh, this one, yeah. So this is, I believe, available on our variety of different presentations on the Commission's webpage. So, yeah, it's pretty complicated, but basically it's a situation where every 5 years you go through a reporting process, and that reporting process involves adaptive management and monitoring to make sure you're meeting your goals and benchmarks. And we'll talk more about that later in my presentation, if we have time. So I'm going to try to speed ahead so we can get to some of the things, because I see we're at 30 minutes left. So important things to remember about how VSP works with the GMA is the VSP is entirely voluntary. So that means your county CAO is not going to apply when VSP exists in your county, but all other regulations and laws still do apply. So VSP is not a get out of jail free card. VSP only replaces the county critical area ordinance. That's as simple as I can say it. So, you know, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, federal laws like that will still apply. So I think I'll leave that there because we can generate a lot of questions on that one. The other thing about VSP is compared to the GMA is obviously GMA uses that regulatory approach where kind of one size fits all, and VSP is designed to be at that local level where each county work group crafts its own goals and benchmarks to protect the critical areas while maintaining agricultural viability. So you could have different practices being emphasized in different counties based on the nature of the natural resource needs in that county, if that makes sense. All right. What that means is that the county work group must account for all of those changes, all of the landowners coming into the program and all of the landowners leaving the program if they leave. It's kind of a headache for the county work group to do that, but that is how VSP is designed because the landowners are free to come in and free to leave whenever they choose. And that's one of the reasons why the county work group needs to meet on a regular basis to assess the conditions in the county, to look at the monitoring that's being done, to see if the goals and benchmarks set out in the work plan are still being met or not. And if they're not, then the plan needs to be adaptively managed to deal with that. Okay. The other really important aspect of VSP versus GMA is VSP is focused on the watershed scale, what's going on at the watershed scale, not at the parcel scale. So this goes into a little bit of that concept of the 6 landowners example that Ron Schultz has always brought up and talks about so well. You don't necessarily need every parcel in the county to participate in VSP to meet your goals and benchmarks, but you need some. You need someone to participate, or else you're not going to meet your goals and benchmarks. How many you need depends on the conditions based on that baseline and what your goals are to make sure you're protecting critical areas and maintaining agricultural viability. And again, that's going to be unique for each of the 27 counties. So if you are at all curious as to what your county says about that, the answer is going to be in the county work plan. That's where you need to go to get that information. And then VSP requires reporting, like we talked about, 2 years and 5 years at the very least, which is different than GMA regulations, which doesn't have any reporting like that. Again, thanks. I think Brian also put this slide together just to give you a graphic of what the differences are between the Growth Management Act and the Voluntary Stewardship Program. It kind of sums up all the different differences, but I'm not going to spend too much time on that because we just talked about it. I'm going to speed through some of the roles during implementation because this, again, is important for Conservation District employees to know that there's a whole bunch of folks involved in VSP. It's not just county planning staff or the county that's involved. You have lots of different stakeholders in VSP, and they all have different roles to play. So we already talked about the commission. I'm not going to spend too much time there. And we talked about the technical panel. You can see the actual folks who are on it currently, and I'm not going to spend too much more time there. State agencies have certain directives within the statute, and you can see them all listed on your screen there. But primarily, they interact with us on the technical panel and with you on the technical panel. Statewide Advisory Committee, we already talked about. I'm not going to spend any more time there, other than currently through this 5-year reporting process, they are advising the director on whether or not the director should concur with the assertion of the work groups that they're meeting their goals and benchmarks in their work. So that's a really important role for them. We could spend a whole presentation just talking about what the county watershed work group should be doing. Most of the things on your screen there, that's just a summary of some of the things they should be doing. And as you probably all know, the watershed work groups at the county level are all staffed by volunteers, right? The members are volunteers. So it's a heavy lift for them to do all of these different things. But really, they need to provide that strategic direction for the technical service provider, for the entity that is implementing VSP on making sure they're meeting their goals and benchmarks. They need to be involved with coordinating budget, and involved in the reporting process every 2 years and every 5 years, and adaptively managing their work plan as they move forward. So to that end, to do that well, the work group members need to know what's in their work plan. They need to be trained on VSP in this sort of a format. And we can do it at the commission, and we have done it, and we have resources available for them on our webpage, or the technical service provider can do that training, but they need to be aware of VSP, just like the county commissioners do. They need to know what VSP is all about for it to be a success in their county, and one of the ways that can happen is for the county work group or the technical service provider to provide some briefings to the county commissioners on a regular basis. So we urge the county work groups to do that. County staff should also be trained and know what their roles are, and it kind of depends on how VSP is being implemented in the county as to what their role might be. Probably the most important thing for you all, because you're probably technical service providers since you work for the district, is on this slide, which is know what's in the work plan, which means you have to read that work plan and figure out what the deliverables are, not only in the work plan, and I'm talking there about what are the goals and benchmarks and what monitoring needs to be done to meet those, but also what are the deliverables in the county's contract with the commission for VSP, because we put some deliverables in there to ensure that each county is meeting the statutory requirements. And the best way to do that is to come up with a project management plan. All right, reporting and evaluation. So we talked already about the reporting requirements. I'm not going to focus too much on this since we're running short on time, other than to say that the commission has a number of resources available, talking about the 2-year reports and the 5-year reports. The 2-year reports are due at the end of each biennium, so the next 2-year report for VSP is due August 30th this year, 2021, and it's direct from the statute on your screen there. Provide a written report of the status of plans and accomplishments to the county and the commission. So it's kind of a summary of how far along are we on our planned implementation, what have we done? So it's really as simple as that. The main difference between the 2-year status report and the 5-year reporting process is the technical panel, the commission, no one reviews and evaluates those 2-year status reports. It cannot be used, is not used as a trigger to fail a county out of VSP. And the format's up to each county work group to figure out what they want that to look like. When we get those at the commission, we post them to our webpage. Probably all of you are very familiar with the 5-year review and evaluation report, since we've been doing that for the last 18 months or so. This is a report that is reviewed and evaluated by the tech panel, and it is a trigger point for failing out of VSP. So the commission has worked with all the different county work groups to make sure you've met your deadline for submitting that, and everyone has. Every 5 years from the date of funding, those 5-year reports are due. You can see the schedule, what it looks like for the next 5-year report. This would be the 10-year reporting process. So for Chelan and Thurston, it's coming up quicker than others, right? Only about 3 years away, but everyone else is still 4 years out because we're still working on the first 5-year reporting process. All right, I'm going to skip over this slide and this one too. We have a guide and a template that I'm sure most of you are aware that we're using for the 5-year report. And the guide gives you a step-by-step of how to go through the 5-year reporting process. I'm going to skip this slide because it just shows the difference between the 2-year and the 5-year reports, which I've already covered. And then the commission reviews those, and the director gets to decide if she agrees or not with the assertion of a work group that they're meeting the goals and benchmarks. So sorry, I skipped through that pretty quick, but I wanted to get to the budget and talk about that a little bit. So you can see the budget there, the last bullet, 8.45 million is the budget for the upcoming biennia. And we allocate that at the commission in the 4 different buckets, one to the counties, one to the state agencies that staff the technical panel. We have funding for WDFW's high resolution change detection, and then also for administration of VSP through the commission. So you can see on your screen there, the allocation for the counties is a little bit less than it was last biennium, then this upcoming biennium at 235,000 for the biennium, so 2% reduction. And that goes to the counties. It's required to go to the counties. It can't go directly to the districts. And it's up to each county to decide how to spend those funds. And the commission requires within 4 months of the signing of the contract that the county work group send us a budget, so we get a sense of how the county is planning on spending those funds. And as I've said before, the majority of those funds are filtered through the districts for the actual implementation. And the commission's always asserted that those funds that the counties receive should go to designate a employee either at the county or at the conservation district to do all those things listed in the last set of bullets there, because there are a lot of statutory obligations and contract deliverables that have to be done to make sure VSP is a success. And all of those funds, the 235, can't realistically be spent on cost share because then you won't be able to get all those other activities done unless you're going to somehow fund all those other activities in another way, which is possible. It would be up to the county to decide. So we're getting kind of low on time, and I want to leave enough time for questions. So I might just skip through most of the rest of the budget and get to some of the current events for you. So we can talk. If you have any questions about the budget, I would urge you to give me a call. We can talk in more detail about that. But I'm going to skip ahead here to talk. I'm going to skip the contract discussion too, because those are all details we can get to at a later time. I want to get to the current events and resources. We already talked about the tutor status reports coming due, so I'm not going to focus too much time there. But all the details are on this slide, and this slide is going to be available here and also on the commission's webpage, so you know where to send those tutor reports later this summer. The 5-year reports, we are still processing those. We have public meetings coming up on 6 or 7, 8 or 9 counties that are left through the rest of this summer. And then the commission is set to conduct a stakeholder review of the 5-year review and evaluation process. And I can tell you that we have that meeting set for the Howell Holmes Center in Ellensburg on September 29th. And we will be setting out in the next month's VSP newsletter, save the date for that. And it's going to be in person, but also as a webinar, so you can attend in person or you can attend by webinar. We're anticipating being able to meet in person at the end of September. So look for more information on that in the VSP newsletter. We also have updated our policy advisories, and these are things related to VSP policy that didn't make it into the statute. So the commission has created 6 of them, and they're all on our Statewide Advisory Committee webpage. There's 2 new ones there, or not 2 new ones, 1 new one, 0621, about VSP and new agricultural activities, and we clarified 0419 CAOs in the VSP. So I would urge you, if you haven't read through all of those, to look through all of those to give you a sense of policy advisories. We also have a whole bunch of stuff on the web, and I'm not going to focus on that. The newsletter I talked about. The last thing I wanted to make sure we got to was our vision for the upcoming biennia. So the commission plans on maintaining all of the things we currently do, administering VSP, those bullets on the screen there. But we're also going to focus on some new stuff, and that's on the screen there for you. We anticipate a return to in-person meetings and meetings around the state. So that means our monthly joint technical panel statewide advisory committee meetings, we're going to start holding around the state. We used to just hold those in Lacey and have a web attendance option. For a variety of reasons, we held those in Lacey, but at the beginning of the program, we went around the state with those meetings. And I think we're going to get back to that, because part of what we want to do with those meetings is invite the counties and invite the county work groups to come. So if we have a meeting in Spokane, we would invite, the folks in Ponderay, the folks in Lincoln County, that sort of thing, to come to the meeting and talk with the technical panel and statewide advisory committee about how implementation is going in the county, about their monitoring plan, about the things that we have asked them about in the 5-year report. The idea being that we would have a dedicated time for each county to come in and do that as it's convenient for them as we hold these regional meetings around the state. So we can have more of that dialogue up front instead of waiting for the 5-year report process. We also are going to hold that stakeholder meeting listening session that I've already mentioned in September. We're going to hold at least that one, if not more, depends on what the demand is after that meeting, to talk about how well or how not so well the 5-year report template and database and process went. And we also are going to hold quarterly monitoring forums around the state. The first one is set for October. So this is like the monitoring forum we held, I think, in December of last year. Levi Kiesecker is going to be primarily responsible for that. And same sort of format of getting folks together to talk about how well monitoring is going, showcasing some monitoring activities in different counties, in particular things related to VSP. And then we're going to do a VSP regional meetings. We anticipate doing those like we've done in the past. Early on in the program, we held day-long or half-day meetings where we had a variety of VSP-related topics. These were in-person meetings, so we're hoping to have those again as in-person meetings, but again, always with a web option to attend, covering a variety of different topics. So those are all things that we're going to do either more of or differently moving forward in the next biennium. And we'll skip these because we just kind of talked about it. We'll skip over the schedule. This is a proposed schedule that we're going to use, and there'll be more on this in the future. We're going to talk more about this in a variety of different formats, but this is in conjunction to the joint technical panel statewide advisory committee meetings, and setting aside the dedicated time for each county to come in and talk with those two entities about how their 5-year report goals and benchmarks and monitoring and adaptive management is going. All right, we already covered stakeholder listening sessions, monitoring forums we talked about, and the regional meetings. Okay, so this is, I think, my last slide, the takeaway message. So if I had to put on one slide everything I think CD staff persons should know if you're responsible for VSP implementation for your county, it's listed on this slide. If I had to choose 7 things, it would be these 7, I guess. So make sure you read the work plan. Understand your role in the VSP implementation in your county. Facilitate and work with your county VSP watershed work group. Ensure your county budget allocates enough resources to meet all of those statutory deliverables and contract deliverables that I talked about. Prepare now for the next reporting period, the 2-year report and the 10-year report by working with your watershed work group to monitor and adaptively manage the work plan. Be sure to communicate with your county and the work group often. and let them know how things are going with the implementation of VSP. And cost share reimbursement, make sure you always clear everything through the county work group through an open public meeting to ensure that you can get reimbursed for expenses. Okay, yeah, that's the end. So sorry I went a little long, but we still have time for questions. So I'm going to throw it open for questions.
Thanks, Bill. There are a few in the questions box to bring up. So the first one is, when making changes to the work group committee members, does the county commissioners have to approve it also, or just the work group?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And you bring up one of those aspects of VSP that some folks like and other folks don't like. And that is the commission has left that up to you to decide. The commission has left that up to each county work group to decide that. And typically what I mean by that is the county work groups come up with their own ground rules and operating procedures and that sort of thing. So if you don't know the answer to that question, I would bring it up with the county work group and also bring it back to the county commissioners and say, this doesn't look like it's been figured out yet. How would you like to address this? And I can tell you that we have a wide variety of how that's addressed. Some counties, the Board of County Commissioners approves every single participant on the county work group through a very formal process, a very formal application process. Others leave that up to either the consultant or the technical service provider to kind of figure out those details. And it's a very informal process. So for better or worse, it's kind of up to you how you want to address that. We can give you some guidance on that if you'd like. We have some resources on, county work group operating rules and ground rules. We have that sort of thing if you'd like to see it, if you don't already have it in place.
Thanks, Bill. The next question, do you know how many counties or technical committees are requiring full NRCS plans versus non-NRCS type plans or documents for the landowners?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I have that on a to-do list to accurately document that, but we don't have a running list of that at our fingertips right now. I can tell you that my guess would be that about half of the counties treat those ISPs as full NRCS plans, but I wouldn't want to quote me on that for sure. But yes, that has been something that's been on our task list to go through each of the work plans and lift out that information.
Thanks, Bill. Can the commission add a policy about opting in to the program?
Yes, we can do anything, but I don't think it's going to hold water if we were to do that. And I'm kind of being a little facetious there. I would say no, we would need a statutory change to do that. And I don't think the statutory change is beyond the realm of possibility. It just hasn't generated enough support to get passed yet when that's been proposed in the state legislature.
And I saw a hand up too. Not sure if you want to chime in there, Ron.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So on the opt-in, we cannot do it by policy. It has to be a legislative change. But I know there are at least 3 counties and districts where there's an interest to do that. In 2020, there was legislation that was sponsored by came out of Pierce County out of an interest there. So I think there's an opportunity to open up some conversation, but there's a lot of people we have to check with. But one of my takeaways from this conference is that's something that we could start checking on.
Thanks, Ron. The next question, are the watershed groups generally fully filled with volunteers? If not, does this have any impact on implementation of VSP or with the State Advisory Committee?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but yes, all of the watershed work groups, all of the members are volunteers. Now, some watershed work groups have invited state or federal or even county staff to participate, to sit on the work groups. Now, obviously, those folks are kind of, they're getting paid through their home agency to be on the work group, but they are different from the volunteer members of the work group. So the work groups, as staffed, as described in the statute, are staffed by volunteers, fully volunteers.
Thanks, Bill. Those are all the questions that have come in so far. I don't see any more hands raised. This is your chance, folks. If you have a question, raise your hand. We can unmute you or just drop that question into the questions box.
Yeah, and again, if you have any questions, you can see the list of folks at the commission involved in VSP on your screen there. So you can get a hold of any one of us. If we can answer your question, we'll direct you to the person who can.
So yeah, we have one more question that's come in. Can you use VSP funds to match ecology grants?
I tentatively would say yes, but I would direct you to Carla at the commission for that kind of a question, because really you must abide by the commission's grants procedures manual, and I don't know everything that's in that grants procedures manual by heart, but I know Carla does. So I would say yes, but I would leave that up for Carla to have the final answer.
Thanks, Bill. We're just about out of time, folks. So if you do come up with another burning question, you can see contact information on your screen right now for folks at the commission you can get in touch with. Thanks so much for sharing all that content with us this afternoon, Bill. Let's go ahead and wrap up. Thanks again, Bill, and we will transition into our next topic. Our next session is an open format. There are no dumb questions. So you may recall this from prior WADE conferences where we used to put it out there as stump your regional manager. We're trying something a little bit virtual this year. So thanks again, Bill.